next item is the consent calendar.
Move to adopt.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. This is the time for the public has a chance to speak to us. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, I never do, but items that would be of interest to the Planning Commission. No comments that are slanderous or in anything along those lines. And the chair, we reserve the right to limit your speech to 3 minutes. Does anybody wish to speak to something that is not on the agenda? Hearing none.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
A question for staff. I neglected in my approval of the, or motion to approve the consent calendar. Under item 10 on the minutes, matters from commissioners and staff, we also received the new policy from Susan Zito regarding attendance. And I noticed that wasn't included in this, and is that something we would have to include in order for the minutes to be accurate? Sorry that I missed that.
Yeah, it's our own mission. We could certainly do that as stated.
Yes.
Do you want to readopt the minutes with that correction?
Yeah, I guess sorry for the delay, but I would move that we adopt the
Technically, you should formally
move that we revise the minutes.
or deny the previous action so that you can reapprove the minutes as amended. So
Wouldn't it just be easier to revise them and approve in a revision? They're approved. They're actually good as they go, but we're going to make a revision and approve that.
I think you've technically acted. You need to
Unact.
unact that particular action and then reapprove. So a motion and second or rescind the previous action, and then someone float a motion with the amended minutes.
So I guess I'll move to rescind approval of the minutes of the December 17th
Second.
meeting.
We have a motion and a second to rescind the previous action. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Make a motion to revise the minutes of the December 17th meeting to reflect under item 10, matters from commissioner and staff, the distribution of the policy regarding attendance of council, commission, and board members.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, you're just right on top of things there. Communications?
There were two communications for your packet. One is a comment letter received at 4 p.m. this afternoon concerning the item on the agenda regarding the housing element update. And the second communication is related to an upcoming Planning Commission meeting on the 21st regarding the next series of chapters for your review of the development guide.
Is that the total of your communications?
Yes, correct.
Okay. We now come to the item 7, public hearings. And the item we have is the draft of the 2013-2021 housing element update and the general plan amendments in an environmental assessment. So do you have the report?
I do. Thank you. Staff seeks the Planning Commission's recommendation to City Council to approve the update to the housing element for the 2013-2021 planning period, and also for the Commission to recommend to receive, adopt, and file the negative declaration prepared for that housing element update. Housing element is one of the 7 mandatory elements under state law that local jurisdictions must provide in their general plan. The purpose of the housing element is to identify and analyze existing and projected housing needs in an effort to preserve, improve, and develop housing for all economic segments of the community in accordance with state law. A housing element is the only general plan element for which the state certification is required, and the housing element certification is done by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, otherwise known as HCD, and that would occur after adoption by City Council. State law further dictates when housing elements must be updated, and this depends upon the region within the state. The city is in a jurisdiction within the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG, region. And the city must update and adopt its housing element within 120 calendar days after October 1st, 2013. And the date I provided for you is February 28th. So we have until February 28th of this year for the city to remain on what's called the 8-year housing element planning update cycle. Should we fail to adopt the housing element by February 28th, the city would be required to update its housing element every 4 years. The current element update began in early 2013. This commission may remember that a housing element workshop was provided where staff discussed with you all as well as the public regarding housing element programs that we were looking at to continue, scrap, or add new programs for the upcoming cycle. Staff also developed since 2013 and implemented a housing element survey. We conducted meetings with housing advocates, developers, local service providers to solicit input regarding housing resources and housing related issues. An administrative draft was used and sent to HCD back in August of last year, where HCD rendered its review and administrative draft in a letter findings dated October 9th. And that's part of your staff report as Exhibit A. Upon receipt of those comments and findings by the HCD, staff made edits to the housing element in response to HCD's comments in preparation for the document before you this evening. And also at that same time, staff prepared an initial study, which was done per the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act to evaluate the potential environmental effects of the housing element update. The initial study indicated that the project would not result in a potential for significant environmental impacts. Therefore, staff prepared what's called a negative declaration, circulated that document for a 30-day period in accordance with state statute. That 30-day period began on December 6th of last month and ended yesterday, January 6th, 2014. The draft housing element covers the city's housing policies, goals and objectives for the 8-year planning period, which again is between 2013 through 2021. Discussed within the housing element update are population growth and trends, household characteristics, housing costs, residentially zoned land inventories, constraints to the development housing, special housing needs, etc. Also discussed in this update is the city's fair share housing need for the SACOG region in which the city is located. That's called the RHNA numbers, or Regional Housing Needs Allocation. Figure 1 on page 3 depicts the RHNA numbers for this particular housing element cycle. Again, the 2013 to 2021. A total of 372 dwelling units is the city's regional fair share allocation for that 8-year period. The 372 units comprise of 39 units for extremely low household incomes. That's a household with income between 0 and 30% of the median household income of the city. Based on the U.S. Census data, the median household income within Placerville is approximately $52,200. 39 units are to be allocated for very low-income households. These are incomes that are between 31 and 50% of the median household income. 55 units are allocated for low-income households. These households are between 51 to 80% of the median household income. 69 units are allocated for moderate income households. These are households with incomes between 81 to 120% of the median household income. And the last is above moderate, and there are 170 units are allocated for that income category. And those are households incomes that are over 120% of the median household income. The update also includes a housing strategy, which indicates how the city will meet its housing needs identified in the update. This strategy includes programs which are designed for implementation over the planning period to meet the general plan goals of providing land inventory to meet its fair share housing needs, or RHNA, to facilitate the housing of special needs households, preserve existing housing stock, conserve affordable housing opportunities, etc. Now, much of the housing strategy programs were carried over from the 2008 to 2013 planning period. However, new programs were added to address new statutory requirements that are now in effect and must be included in this cycle. Some highlights to go over a little bit briefly with you involving the housing programs. Number 3, program 3 is a high-density development. Staff addressed potential rezone sites needed to meet unmet RHNA inventory availability to serve lower income households. Again, that's the categories of low, very low, and low income at the R5 or 20 dwelling units per acre or more density as required under state law. Rezoning would accommodate all unmet lower income RHNA needs for the current planning period and the 106 unit unmet need during the 2008-2013 planning period. Program 4 addresses what's called single room occupancy units. This program would revise the zoning ordinance text to address state law requirements that the city encourage and facilitate a variety of housing types, including single room occupancy units. At current, the city does not define or address what's called SROs in its zoning ordinance. Program 6 would also involve some text amendments to the zoning ordinance to accommodate provisions of what's called the Employee Housing Act. The housing element would be amended as necessary to permit by right in any zone which allows single-family residential uses a residential structure providing accommodation for 6 or fewer agricultural employees. Also, another amended text provision would involve just one zone, the estate residential zone, and revisions would add the allowance to permit an agricultural use of employee housing consisting of no more than 36 beds in a group quarters or 12 units or spaces designed for use by a single family or household. Program 8, transitional supportive and emergency housing. This program would address the requirements under Senate Bill 2, which is designed to increase opportunities for the development of transitional and supportive housing in the city's mixed-use zones. Those zones are the commercial, business professional, highway commercial, central business district, and convenience commercial zones. The changes would permit transitional and supportive housing, restricting the allowance of those to only those restrictions that apply to other residential uses in the same zone. Public notice for tonight's meeting was published in the Mountain Democrat back on December 6th. Notice was also mailed to property owners and to those property owners within 500 feet of all sites identified within the update as potential rezone sites. As I mentioned, we did receive one public comment regarding the negative declaration or the update to the housing element. That has been provided to you. It was received from Michael Cook at 4 p.m. this afternoon, who represents Sutter Community Bank, who owns 3 of the parcels that are potential for rezoning up to the 20 dwelling units per acre. It's expected that with the city's existing residential inventory and the proposed housing programs that I've outlined, as well as further details in the update itself, that the city will have adequate sites available to meet its fair share RENA for the 2013 to 2021 planning period. Also, the 106 units of unmet lower income need from the previous planning period, 2008 to 2013. Staff therefore recommends the commission conduct a public hearing to receive public comment regarding the update as well as the negative declaration, and then by minute order recommend that City Council adopt a negative declaration prepared, circulated, and noticed according to state law, and then by minute order recommend the City Council adopt the housing element update for the 2013-2021 planning period. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions?
Actually, I do have a question for staff.
I mean, maybe it's part of the document. I could hold it till after the public hearing if you like.
It's up to you.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I had just one question. I noticed in the inventory of sites that would be potentially suitable for low income, we have 2, and which isn't a lot. And I guess my question is, if let's assume that in this planning cycle, those were approved, and then they're built. Okay, so they're used. So in the next planning cycle, we wouldn't have any, right? So what would happen to us in that case? Now we've used up what we had, then what?
Well, depending on what our numbers, RENA numbers are going to be for the next cycle, if all of them were used up during, if like in your scenario, if low-income housing was constructed during that time on these sites, then yes, our inventory would no longer be suitable to meet that particular need. So yes, the city would have to entertain other areas in which to rezone to meet that requirement under state statute.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question on the R5 zoning. It mentions a minimum density. What about a maximum? Is there any plan to mention a maximum, or can it be rewritten?
Under state law, it's a minimum is the requirement. Yes, the city, I think, intends to have a cap or maximum, and that would come out during that process, which would be under a separate environmental document, which would be evaluating those impacts at that time.
And that would be within a year?
Well, there really are kind of because there are 2 unmet needs, and because the city failed to rezone properties to address the unmet need for the 2008 to 2013 planning cycle, we need to rezone within 1 calendar year of adoption of this document to meet that unmet need. Under law, we have 3 years to provide inventory to meet the unmet need for this planning cycle. But in practicality, I know staff, the director and I have talked about how practical we would move forward. We would likely do 1 rezoning. The actions taken would be consecutive. It would likely involve the same environmental document. Perhaps the director would want to chime in, but we've kind of talked about that. Of course, we haven't asked council to start that process yet, and of course they haven't considered this document yet, but that's kind of what we're thinking out the box right now.
Yeah, staff would just point out that this is a proposed program
Yeah.
that's part of the housing element, and there's 2 parts to this program too that I want to make sure that you're aware of. The city did create an R5 residential zone district, but it's currently defined as a 20 units per acre maximum. And as Mr. Painter pointed out, state law is requiring us to prepare or to have a zone district that provides for a 20-acre minimum. So not only will the city propose to rezone sites to the R5, we will also propose a text change to our zoning code to reflect the requirements that's being imposed on us by the state, that the zone district be a 20-acre minimum with some maximum that we will propose at that time that we move forward with the rezone process.
I saw mentioned in there that it was a default zone, and was that to help us because otherwise we had to do extensive analysis of needs of groups and financials and such?
That sort of summarizes what we were up against, yes. I will be honest with you that it was my contention at the time when the administrative draft went down to HCD. I made the argument to HCD that we had adequate inventory of multiple family zones to accommodate all income levels. But the findings coming back from HCD specified that, well, without analysis that these other zonings can truly create or have the ability to create low-income housing, then if you can't substantiate that, then there is this default zoning that you can use. And so we chose to not do the analysis and accept the 20 dwelling units per acre minimum. But yes, it would involve more analysis that staff did not have time to perform.
Yeah, basically, if I could just restate that. What Mr. Painter is saying is the city was caught with the dilemma of having to show through some intensive number crunching. For example, we'd have to show the land value, the cost of putting in the infrastructure, building the structure, all of the costs involved in developing, say, the R3 or R4 multifamily residential lots, that in the end you would have a product then that would rent for, that the rents would be affordable to low and very low income. And we don't think we could show that is the case. And so therefore, the default zoning that was provided to us, various jurisdictions will have a different default zoning if they're not able to crunch the numbers to show that some lesser density could yield affordable housing. The state basically tells us that you need a zone district that would yield 20 units per acre, and that's what is meant by default.
So if we did all that analysis, would that be considered an unfunded mandate, and could we send the state a bill for all of our expenses?
I would only say that it's probably not an unfunded mandate because the state does not require the city to actually go out and build these affordable units. We just have to eliminate any constraints to building of affordable units by private developers or any groups out there that may want to do so through any governmental constraints. And so what we're doing is trying to provide for a land inventory, that there is land available that provides for 20 units per acre by right, so that somebody could come in and pull the building permit and build 20 units per acre. The only example that I know currently, unless Mr. Painter can correct me, is I believe the senior housing apartments on Clay Street is at 20 units per acre, and that's the only 20 units per acre product here in the city.
Yeah, and they reached that density with a density bonus a few decades back. So at the time it was built, we didn't have the 20 dwelling units per acre, but with a density bonus under state law, you are allowed to exceed the maximum density in a particular zone in order to accommodate a particular income category. And I think that it was chosen that seniors are an income category and a group in which the density bonus can be applied for. One of the other issues the city had is if we had recent experience with development of affordable housing using the R4, R3, and R2 zones, that could have been used as evidence that the city has and does have inventory and appropriately zoned designations to accommodate that use. But during the last 15 years, we've basically had no multifamily construction done. Nearly all of it, with some exceptions of duplexes and Eschaton Senior development there in the Weatherstone site. Most of our development was single family, detached, sitting on larger lots. So we didn't have that background to present to the state, which made a much more difficult and uphill battle to try to substantiate why and how R2, R3, and R4 would meet that low-income need.
Can the density bonus also be applied on top of the R5?
Yes, it may.
Any other questions, comments? With that, we'll open the public hearing on this matter, and please state your name.
Good evening. My name is Michael Cook. I'm an attorney with Hefner, Stark & Roy, representing Sutter Community Bank. And as Mr. Painter indicated, we submitted a letter to you this evening. Your notice indicated that this hearing was to contemplate the housing element update and the negative declaration prepared for that. So our letter is submitted so that I don't have to go over every word and to supplement the record this evening. Sutter Community Bank is the owner of a little more than 20 acres off of Mallard Lane. This project came before this commission in the early 2000s and then again in about 2006. When I looked at the minutes of those meetings, I think a couple of you were on the commission, at least in the 2006 timeframe, so you're probably familiar with the site. Sutter Community Bank got this property back as a result of a foreclosure. They had loaned construction proceeds for the overall project, got back this 20-acre piece, 5 of which is completely unusable, but about 15 acres of usable property. When that project came in front of you in 2006, long time since, there's no development agreement, there's no vesting tentative maps, but there was a development plan brought before you and a planned development overlay zoning requested on top of the existing R3 zoning. And this commission made the necessary findings at that time in terms of site constraints, topography, and design that the mixed-use development that they proposed, our predecessor, the developer, but who we loaned the money to and now have the property back, that mixed-use project was appropriate. It was 53 units in one subdivision, which exists out there and you're probably well aware of, which has only sold 8 units so far. There's 40-something vacant. They're having some difficulties, as is the bank, in marketing its project. What we had approved, or the development plan, which, if I understand your zoning ordinance, I don't know that we have absolute rights to it, but the planned development overlay, I believe, stays in place even though after 18 months expire, unless your commission takes an action to revoke it. And I don't think you have to this point. Be that as it may, we had 84 units of duplex/condominium type housing and 19 units of single family. Even that's unique in Placerville, best I can tell, and you've had very little multifamily or attached development in the last 10 years. In 2006, that project, the two of you who were here will remember, engendered quite a bit of public input, including a petition, I believe, from the folks who live across the street, across Mallard. Our property is a terraced property. I would call it heading west away from Mallard. The subdivision to the east of Mallard is significantly below. The remainder property that we have, half of it is above even the 52-unit subdivision on our own site and looks down on it. Before I get into what our points are I'd like to handle, I want to do three things. One is very quick housekeeping. The second is to discuss the CEQA analysis that you've done to this point. And the last is to tell you why we are opposed to the housing element update and particularly Program 3. The housekeeping issue. We were retained on Friday, so I may have some of my facts wrong because I've had 2.5 days to scramble and try and get up to speed. Sutter Community Bank, which owns 20.79 out of the 21 acres or 22 acres that you're planning to rezone if you adopt the housing element, tells us that they didn't know about this until last week. Now we're here and we're catching up and getting up to speed. I've talked to staff and they have indicated, as they did tonight, and I have no doubt that it's true, that notices went out to property owners within 500 feet. But the notices that went out said you were having a hearing on a housing element update, and the negative declaration related to that housing element update. You'd have to, I'm 26 years as a land use attorney, you have to be in our business. I don't believe any neighbor who got that would know that what is being proposed across Mallard from them is 20 units per acre minimum density on 15 acres that terraces up and looks down over them. If we didn't get notice, and I think we got it, I think we got the flyer about this meeting, they just didn't know it at the bank. I'm thinking if they threw it away at the bank, they may have in the neighborhood, and I think that's a problem. Secondly, that's really not sufficient notice to the owner of 3 parcels comprising 95 or 96% of what's in your housing element update to be rezoned. Nobody met with them, nobody called them. There's a sign on the property that has a broker's name listed. We're happy to work with the city, but we need to be involved in the process, and instead we're here at the 11th hour, and I'm going to ask you to do some things that I know staff doesn't want, you're not going to like to hear, but I do believe you need to step back and reanalyze this entire program. That's the housekeeping issue. On a CEQA front, the housing element update, I've dealt with this in other jurisdictions. It's very difficult. I feel for staff. If you're behind on your arena numbers, HCD comes down on you. It happened in the city of Folsom. It happened in the city of Galt. You're in a catch-up process. We get that. And you need to find some sites that will be affordable to low-income residents. On the other hand, it doesn't help you to do things either quickly or approve projects that are infeasible. You won't satisfy HCD and you won't have done the process correctly. Our contention is your housing element update has not been appropriately analyzed for CEQA purposes. If you read the initial study upon which the housing element update is based, the conclusion is it could not result in any significant environmental impacts. And then you read through the 8 or 9 categories, and the reason is consistent. It's because this is a policy document that doesn't really implement any land use changes, but that's not true. Program 3 requires it requires the rezoning of 3 parcels. It's really 2, as one of the commissioners pointed out. My client owns 20.79 acres of the 22. And you can't meet your 1-year obligation or your 3-year obligation without impacting our client's property. Update of the housing element in the fashion that it's drafted now requires a rezoning. The fact that that rezoning won't happen for 9 months or 6 months or 18 months is irrelevant. CEQA says that if you're going to approve a project and you've had 1 million projects in front of you, a rezoning of property is a project, and CEQA defines approval as the date upon which the city commits to a particular action. If you adopt this, if the council adopts this housing element update, and included within the update is a mandate that you rezone property, you're taking the action. You must comply with CEQA. You need to know, are there erosion effects, are there traffic effects, etc. For our protection as a property owner, and your protection as an agency, but more importantly, so the community around the property can comment. You haven't done that. I'm telling you that your CEQA analysis is deficient. If you we would ask you to defer and go back and do the appropriate analysis. A negative declaration will not be the appropriate analysis. Maybe a neg deck will be, but I would be very doubtful about that. This property is significantly sloped. There's one access point, McIntosh Drive. Those of you who, as I said before, remember this project, approved 103 units there, controversial. This rezoning would mandate 310 units on a 15-acre site, 15 net acres. That's 3 times the amount of cars going through the intersection. 300 units would require 400 parking stalls on a terraced property. It would probably require you to go to 3 stories or 4 stories in height, and you're already 150 feet above the people across Mallard Lane. There's no question. There's traffic impacts, there's aesthetic impacts, there's likely drainage impacts, there's erosion control impacts. All of that needs to be studied. The hope agencies place in the method that you're moving forward with is, no, you can bifurcate the project and that's sufficient environmental analysis, and don't worry, when we do the actual rezone, we'll catch up and we'll do the analysis then. Can't do that. That's not what the law says. And if you adopt this housing element update, it becomes part of your general plan. Zoning has to comply with your general plan, and your general plan is going to say these 3 sites will be rezoned. You don't have any choice. So, number 1, I'm going to ask you not to recommend certification of the neg deck. It's not compliant with CEQA. You should direct staff to go back and do the appropriate CEQA analysis, notice the actual rezonings of both my client's property and the Cedar Ravine property, and let people have the appropriate amount of input. Will that cost you something? Apparently it will make you do updates every 4 years instead of every 5, if I understood staff correctly. But it doesn't matter. You got to do it right. That's the CEQA analysis. From a planning standpoint, if someone walked into Placerville from Mars and said, look, you're about 20 acres short on affordable housing to low and very low income residents, why don't you fix that problem? I don't think very many people would say, well, the answer to that is to go find a steeply sloped hillside project surrounded by residential and rezone it for 20 units minimum to the acre and slam it all right there. That just doesn't seem like appropriate planning, that you would put, or try to put, 300 units of affordable, low-income project in one spot as opposed to disperse it around. Moreover, Mallard, as I said, this property is steep, it's got limited access, it's not on a transit line. There is no transit line that goes out to Mallard. The transit is more than a half mile away. Employment centers are more than a half mile away. It's not a great site. Now, we have 20 acres, and we've already shown a willingness to do mixed-use development. My client would like to offer to you that we're willing to talk with staff, talk about the feasibility of putting 20 units in some portion of the site that's flat, but there's no way you will accomplish 20 units to the acre over a 15-acre site on a hillside, nor should you want to. It just doesn't make any sense. It does one thing. It gets HCD off your back, but it destroys my client's interest in their property. And in truth, if HCD figures it out, it doesn't get them off your back anyway, because it's never going to happen. You're not going to continue the item, drive out there and look at the site, look at the prior approvals. You aren't going to get 20 units there. You're only going to get them there in theory, and you're not going to get them there when you properly notice this, because politically it's going to become a problem, because the neighbors aren't going to want it and they're going to recognize the impacts. Bottom line, I apologize for showing up at the 11th hour, but we got really notice of this on the 10th hour. And we recognize that the city's in a box and needs to fix its housing element. We're willing to be part of the solution. But you can't have one property owner with one project be the entire, or 96% of the entire solution that wasn't a problem of our making. It's a bad idea at a bad site. It's not good for the neighbors. It will be damaging to our client, and it won't accomplish your objectives. So bottom line, we would ask you not to certify the neg deck, to refer this back to staff for the appropriate analysis, and in the meantime, we would like to come up and work with staff, work with the council, work with the community to identify the right number of sites. And if we're participants to some number of acres and the neighbors don't object, great, we'd be happy to participate. Thank you. I'm sorry that was a rather long presentation, but it's a difficult situation we find ourselves in. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Before you leave, you have any comments or questions?
I just want to thank you for the clarity of the presentation on a complex issue. I, at least, was able to follow it. That doesn't mean I necessarily concur, but I was able to follow it. And thank
Okay.
you very much for that.
Thank you.
Michael? No. Thank you. I guess you're off the hook for now. Maybe something will surface a little later. Next gentleman.
Hello, my name is Jim Jacob. I also got notice of this action happening, and I will concur with the prior speaker's comments that I did not recognize what the impact was of the notice. It took me a few to actually look at the PDF this past weekend, and I also was kind of surprised at what was being presented. I would like to concur the Mallard Road is a very steep hill. It is not traffic safe for 3 times the volume or 4 times the volume that it currently carries, both because of its steepness and because it has several turns that are fairly blind. Remediation of that would probably require the removal of the entire hilltop, which is prohibitively expensive and probably would destroy an entire section of the town. Additionally, something that should be considered in talking about that doing additional terracing and earth moving in that area. I believe that area is fill dirt that was created in part by the Orchard Hill subdivision soil remediation. Since that soil was put there with the intent of trying to cap it and keep it there forever, to dig it all up and start moving it around for multiple terracing will defeat the very purpose that it was created for. I think that also should be addressed within an environmental declaration as well. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sue Rodman. I'm a resident of Placerville. And I can understand the city's need to get out of the box. I also agree with the previous 2 gentlemen. This is not the way to do it. This neg deck is not adequate. You need at least an environmental assessment, and it may go to the level of an EIR. I do not believe that you can say that what you're proposing to do would have no negative environmental consequences. One of the things that I have talked to this council and the planning commission about several times is the need for a slope ordinance in Placerville that would address some of these steep slopes and put some limits as to what sort of densities and where you can build. We have seen in Southern California, we have seen in the Bay Area where they have ignored slopes and allowed people to build on unstable soils and unstable slopes. And then we watch on the news when they do get the good rain that these houses are now sliding down the hill because they built them where they should never have built them. I would like to see Placerville be wise enough. We've already got some areas that are a little dicey. Esty Way is one of them, which is in my neighborhood. And there are others. I would like to see us not go down that path to create any more. And I think this idea of over across from the Mallard Way development is not a good place to be putting a lot of high density and ripping into those steep slopes, because there are some steep slopes in there, and we should be a lot more sensitive to our slopes. We live in a canyon, you guys. It has steep slopes. It has unstable soils. How many people remember the last landslide on Highway 50? How many people remember the one before that? those are reoccurring problems that we have because of the geology and the soils that we have in this area, and we need to be planning ahead to prevent problems so that we do not create the same kinds of problems that they have in other areas where, okay, now even in Sacramento County, they have an area now that is, the hills were not built correctly. The properties are side sloping down the hills because they built on too steep a slopes and too unstable a soil. So that's something that needs to be a really good analysis. You need a geotechnical report to go with all of this idea of where you're going to rezone. Otherwise, you are throwing the dice out there, and you may get lucky and you may not. But there's one city that is now getting sued for many millions of dollars because they allowed housing to be built on these unstable soils and steep slopes. And so far, I do not see in our housing element or anywhere in general plan amendments talking about doing a slope ordinance for this city. And I think we need to do it. And I think that what's proposed here is a short-term fix that could give us much more problems in the long run than if we actually do it correctly. And I do not think if anybody took this neg deck to court, I think it would go right down.
Thank you. Any other comments from our extensive audience? No? Okay. If not, we'll close the hearing and bring it back to the commission for comments and questions and deliberation.
I have a question for staff. So basically this state is forcing us to zone R5. We have to find some properties to do that with. Can properties in the sphere of influence be so zoned? We can't control it. We have to work with the county, but would that satisfy HCD? Is it a possibility, since we are limited in property in the city limits?
I would ask that Mr. Painter correct me if I misstate, but it's my understanding that the rezoning for these potential, and I say potential because this is a program, these are potential sites. It is not mandatory as was stated, but this is what we propose to do, that it has to be within the corporate limits of the city of Placerville. There are certain components of the housing element as required under state law for preparation of the housing element that we consider lands within the sphere of influence, such as disadvantaged communities and those kinds of things. But as far as citing potential lands to be rezoned, then you're looking at annexation, and so annexation would not be a part of the program for these sites.
Okay, and then in the R5 zone, there is the designation of 20 units minimum. But there are also other uses allowed in there, right? That the property owner could choose to go down that path instead of the high density. Is that possible? And what would staff think about that? Would staff say, no, we need to save this land for the high density, even though within the R5 zone, I didn't bring the text of it.
Yeah, we don't have it here either, but at least I could speak for myself. We don't have a copy of it in front of us, but my recollection is that all of our multiple family zones, which extend from R2 to now R5, they do have a provision that permits, with a conditional use permit, business professional type uses. There may be a scenario where there is a parcel is so configured that could accommodate a doctor's office or you know, an attorney or things of that nature, and that would come back before you as a request. Yes, staff would look at the removal of those lands as it interplays with the city's inventory of affordable housing. So that would be one of the findings that likely this body or city council, upon approval, would need to make when it evaluates such a request to see how it interplays with that inventory, because we would be taking it out of inventory, to use my example of a doctor's office or an attorney's office. No offense to the attorney in the room. So yeah, that would be one of the things we would certainly be evaluating in an environmental document or staff report for your consideration.
So that the R5 rezone is going to be forthcoming down the road.
Yes.
Is it possible to include language where a less dense use could also be chosen by the property owner? Would that satisfy a property owner? Does that start to get to be a problem with HCD?
I think it gets to a problem with the statute that would dictate that we provide a minimum density of 20 dwelling units per acre by right. Now, there's nothing to say that there could be a constraint that would not, you know, allow the construction of that density. And that could be something the city could make and findings made on that behalf. That's true. There could be a site where, although I can't think of one offhand, the city would have the entirety of the acreage be such that would not be conducive for multiple family housing. The site in question on Mallard Lane has been mass pad graded with the previous development. That development expired, as you now know. It is not what it was before. We'd have to evaluate it as it is today, as moving forward. But I guess in a long-winded answer here, you know, I can't think of a property the city has that has a multiple family zone on it. We typically, the city, fathers and mothers, when they established these zone districts, the intent was to locate those where density really could be built. And in the case of the planned development off Mallard Lane, the site was modified to accommodate the density that they proposed at the time. That's absolutely true, as evidenced by what you see out there. Yes, there is some slope. But getting off that particular location, I'm kind of losing my train of thought, but I believe that really the intent of our multiple family zones is, and location-wise, is to be proximity to employment centers, transit, access, where utilities are present and available. And the sites chosen meet all those criteria. Plus, they have other potential benefits of being close to parks, potential new Boys and Girls Club to be built in nearby vicinity, employment sources, things of that nature, which could enhance the quality of life of people who live there. And in essence, and it could also spin where perhaps fewer vehicle travel trips would be necessary because of the proximity to those resources.
So, just a couple of comments in random stream of consciousness, if I may, and also looking at the recommendation that this body is to provide advisory recommendations to the council, and I think that we can do that. So a couple of things have come up, and first of all, I observe that the vast majority of the recommendations for the housing element are benign, and that the good news is I think that we can focus our attention on this particular component. And in fact, I might encourage the chairman to consider, are there any other aspects of this that the commission should take up and deliberate on before we come back to this, but just an observation. So we had a fairly concise, you considered it lengthy, but I thought it was fairly concise presentation by Mr. Cook, correct? on the issues, and which I did appreciate. And unfortunately, what I was left with that, not disagreeing necessarily with your conclusion or your position, but it strikes me as being a fairly legal position, and one that I don't feel competent or experienced to have to make a decision on. It's like something I say, well, this has got to go up to legal counsel for a position, because and there's a well-articulated position in the letter, there's a well-articulated position at the podium, and I presume that the city simply takes a different position. On the nuances of this, from my understanding, is that, and I think, Pierre, you've said this several times, that what's being proposed is a program and not a project. And so my understanding of the environmental document, I just kind of went through the environmental document very quickly again here to see if I missed anything, and everywhere in there the language is project. So when something is being proposed to be constructed or applied to a given area is when I think the rigidity of the environmental review would seem to be most appropriate. I don't know, that's just kind of my position. I do find it kind of comical, maybe backing up a little bit, this term allocation, as if we're being given something. The only thing we're being given, in my view, is a burden. It's a requirement. And I just think that the terminology that's used in this is quite funny. And it's a box, right? No disrespect to the recommendation for the slope ordinance, but I think we have to take those things carefully too, because they become boxes also that constrain us as well. And I'm not a big fan of one-size-fits-all applications of things. Although this commissioner certainly has voted against projects that were going to be mass pad graded and cut into hillsides, as opposed to making it look like the project belonged in the hillside. So I'm not insensitive to that. So I guess what I'm kind of getting at is that at a minimum, my recommendation would be, in terms of our minute order, would be a fairly high level of caution to the council, not opposition or saying the council should not approve this, but I really would like to raise by minute order a level of concern to the council with regard to the adequacy of the document. Again, in the EIR, I have to point out, and I know I'm all over, but like I said, random stream of consciousness, there is nothing in the EIR that I found that specifically deals with slope. It talks about, I believe, erosion or landslide, but beyond that, it doesn't say anything. And I believe that the indication is in the EIR with regards to that is less than significant. Now, staff, I presume, makes that determination. And again, without a specific project, I don't think you can get past that, right? You would have to have the specific project and to see the physical proposal to make a determination as to whether or not we had a real issue with landslide. But beyond that, the EIR that I didn't see really addresses anything beyond the soil erosion and or potential for landslide. So right now, I'm not of an inclination to turn this down, but I would send a fairly high level of caution to council when they look at this in terms of the adequacy of the environmental document. So that's just kind of where I'm at right now with this. And again, going back to, is there anything else in this document that we need to take up in addition, or is everything else fairly benign and it's just really this one one other thing, I'm sorry. I do agree with the thought. I think just from a common sense, it does seem kind of unfair to put the entire burden of meeting this certain allocation requirement burden thing on one parcel. We have two identified, but really the vast majority is all going, and that there does seem to be some imbalance there. And I don't know, if staff, I'm sure you've thought about it, but we didn't really speak to it. And I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, but there is something in that just kind of doesn't seem exactly, fair. But, beyond that. So those are my comments for now, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Well, first question to staff. Has the city satisfied all of its notification requirements in this process? Or did all the notifications go out to the proper radius, to the proper buffer with the proper amount of time for notification?
Yes, the time of physical notification in terms of written went out to time with the publication in the Mountain Democrat announcing the same public notice for this meeting, as well as the availability of the environmental document that you have before you. It did also provide links to and also locations where people can read the proposed updated housing element, as well as the environmental document. So and all of those things are linked on the city's website. People do sign up for the city's Facebook account, so those are usually blasts that go out that are simultaneous to those deliverables to the Mountain Democrat as well as the local radius. So as I'll reiterate, all properties that potentially could be affected by the rezones mentioned here in the update, as well as properties within 500 feet were notified, yes, for this meeting tonight.
Just a follow-up question, because I think there was some mention, maybe in Mr. Cook's presentation, as to the adequacy of the wording of the notice. And I have to assume, I'll just ask the question. So was that generated strictly by staff, or did we have legal counsel that looked at it and said this notice is sufficient? What it is providing adequate information? And I don't know the answer one way or the other. I just know that what was read, I wouldn't, as just an individual, wouldn't necessarily get a sense that something significant was happening. So I don't know what the standard is for the development of those notices. And again, I'm just raising it in terms of the advisory recommendation to council is why I'm asking.
Well, a notification is a general summary of what is proposed for a public hearing, and to include references to all segments of the document would mean printing in a notice the entire document. I don't think that was the state's intent when it adopted the government code sections that relate to housing elements or general plan update elements as we go forward. The city staff attempted to reach out to those property owners affected by sending a notice. We believe we've met our requirements. Would you want to add something, Director Reba?
I guess the only thing I would add is this is the Cycle 5 element update. In our previous housing element that was adopted, this property was identified as being subject to rezone as part of the program on the previous element.
That's true.
What the city failed to do is actually carry out that rezone.
Yes, and that was noted in the staff report.
Yes.
And you're right, correct. So,
But this is
so
not
this
a
is not a
new
new
property.
issue per se.
Right, it's
Yeah.
not a new issue. I would say it isn't a new issue. I mean, because this element shows, the changes made from the last element, and this is what's being proposed then to meet the new statutes.
Right.
There's quite a number of different changes made in terms of, the unmet needs and the disadvantaged communities and the
There's some new
single
new
occupancy
laws.
residences,
Yeah.
and so.
So it references all those things.
So for example, we're gonna have to go into some of our other zone districts and create the ability to have single room occupancy as a use.
And that'll
Well,
come
we're
back
not
before
gonna-
you.
We're not gonna identify all those properties then that would be affected by that, as far as the surrounding. It'd be too onerous to provide such a large notification to everybody. But I just want to make sure, historically, you understand that this is not a newly identified parcel. It was actually part of the previous housing element. It's carried forward into this housing element.
Thank you.
So I guess that gets back to the other item is for me is it's easy to suggest that city staff back up and somewhere find another person here to do a reanalysis on this document because some people are surprised by it. And I understand that property owners, like all of us, are hostages to the attention economy if we don't get to pay attention to everything that crosses our threshold. Be that as it may, there's a process in place for notification. If I understand correctly, that process has been adhered to in this time. So, being very blunt, when a 10th, 11th, or 11:30 plea to bring a notified and mature process to a complete halt takes place, as I say, 4 minutes to midnight, then the burden of proof, as far as I'm concerned, to justify that increases by the factorial. So the closer we decide to pay attention to these things to the deadline, the better prepared we had be to present a very, very compelling argument for that. My sense is that we've had an open process so far. I think also that, as Mr. Friend suggested, that we can move this forward to the City Council with our cautions and reservations, and I would include in that, but if Mr. Cook cares to offer any remedies he intends to pursue based on the outcome of this evening, it might not be a bad idea to make sure that City Council and City Council, Staff Council are aware of what Sutter County banks and their representatives' intent is to do in reaction to this. Just a second. But again, I'm with Mike in that I think some issues were raised tonight which we should strongly caution the City Council about. But all we're doing here is making a recommendation. I think if there's real interest from affected parties, we should expect to see a representative turnout at that City Council meeting. But again, when I'm confronted with a learned attorney making a very effective presentation, I freely admit I don't have the intellectual or experiential tools to completely sufficiently analyze those assertions. So that's where I think having our staff city attorney getting involved in the analysis prior to the next City Council meeting would be very helpful. Mr. Cook, you wanted to say something?
You closed the public hearing? You got to reopen the public hearing?
Well, we haven't reopened the public hearing yet. I've got a couple questions for staff.
Okay, I would like to respond, though.
Well, I'm sure we'll give you a chance, but it's been mentioned or commented by Mr. Friend and my neighbor right here, but that if we approve this or recommend it to the council, that we do it with some reservations or qualifications. That's really not our role, is it? I'm curious about that. We either recommend it or we don't. I don't think we can recommend it conditionally. At least that's my feeling. And do you have a feeling about that here?
I would ask that Mr. Painter follow what I'm about to say as far as what the city's practice has been, but it would be my understanding that if you wish to provide any sort of a statement that we can include in the minutes, those minutes would be provided to the City Council for their consideration.
I guess I would echo that the statement made or statements made would be reflective of the body at large, not individual statements. It
Right.
would be the opinion of, so yeah, we could
The
certainly.
full council.
Yes,
The
thank you.
full
Committee.
committee.
Commission.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, because I kind of raised, as I was reading based on the recommendation. It says by minute order. So we would have to have a motion. The motion would have to contain the statement. Is that what you, I assumed that because the recommendation said by minute order, that the minute order was a description kind of our discussion or our recommendation. So I took this as a broader recommendation as opposed to we recommend the council adopt this and that's the end of it. So, and if that's what it is, then I would think the motion might have to reflect any cautionary notes that we would want the council to take into consideration. Is that right?
Yeah, the commission has the authority to, by minute order and movement of a motion and second, majority of the body present, to offer recommendation to city council regarding this action. Also, under your purview would be the adoption of a resolution. Staff did not prepare that. We chose to do, traditionally here, resolutions are very rare that, and Commissioner Friend may remember those. He could probably remember just a few over the 10 or 12 years he's been a planning commissioner. We don't do that very often. Minute order is our typical rule of the day. So motion second, adoption of a motion is how we proceed here as a planning commission, with some exceptions.
So it just depends on how crafty we are with the motion in terms of what we can convey to council.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, just a few points of clarification, because you will be making a recommendation to the city council. You're recommending that the council adopt a negative declaration on the housing element that includes the program that is contentious as far as the rezone. But I do want to point out, this is for the benefit of the commission and for Mr. Cook that's representing the Sutter Bank, for the benefit of the property owner. Again, it's a proposed program. It doesn't, the city's not compelled to move forward with it. It will be its desire to move forward with it, and there's an analysis that was done within the housing element in terms of achievable density. Mr. Painter can get into more detail about that if you like. It looked at the slope and such. That wasn't the environmental review, though, however. That was a review to see if the property could meet the city's ability to meet its fair share of the housing needs through, the R5 zoning. But I want to point out that once the housing element is adopted and we're looking at whatever potential sites to rezone, there's a number of steps that will be involved that will allow full notice to the property owner. This is adopting the housing element does not mean the property is rezoned. It means the city proposes to rezone it. Right, and it does not amend the text, does not rezone the property. So staff disagrees that a higher level environmental review is required at this time because we don't have the detail of the project. We don't have the actual project before us. Staff will go to the city council and the city council will approve a notice of intent to amend the official zoning map of the city to rezone these properties, and the notice of intent to amend the zoning text to modify the R5 zone district, how it's described. So once they approve that notice of intent, then the formal process for the rezone begins. Then it'll come before you with all the notifications specific to the properties to rezone the property with an environmental document for that rezone. It'll be very, very specific then to that rezone of the property. We're not doing that level of analysis here for a programmatic document. And so staff does disagree with some of the positions of some of the speakers that we need to do that level of environmental review at this stage of the game.
That was going to be a question of mine, is at the time of actual rezone text change adoption, would there be another CEQA document at that point?
Yes, that's required under CEQA. Cannot, rely on this document.
Okay, is it okay, the commission is okay with having Mr. Cook come up or say a couple more things, or?
Well, I'll yield to the power of the chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Cook. We'll reopen the public hearing.
I will be respectful anyway. You won't regret it. Two things. we're playing some word games in my view, and I'm willing to just walk out tonight saying we clearly have a fundamental disagreement on what the law requires. That's fine. We will make our pitch to the city council. I think you meet every first and third Wednesday. My request would only be that you continue the item to the third Wednesday of January and you seek input from your legal counsel. I don't think it's that difficult of an issue. Second, the notice, we're also skirting the issue just a little bit. I did not say that the notice on the housing element update was deficient. You have a housing element update notice that went out. Nowhere in this notice does it refer to rezoning. Nowhere. No one reading this would know unless they went to the links. So you'd have to have a very informed citizenry. Further, I was trying to indicate to you why we're here at the 11th hour. We're 95% of the cure. We never got a phone call. We never got a letter. I think it's unfair to say we're showing up 4 minutes to midnight. We're the most affected property owner, really the only one. Lastly, it's word games to say it's potential sites or the rezones aren't required. Read through the housing element, read the letter from HCD, read what your response is going to be. You can't get there from here. The only way that you can meet the HCD obligations that you're signing up for in the housing element is to proceed with these rezones. And the language in the program doesn't say potential or contemplate. It says the city shall within 9 months and the city shall within 3 years. The decision's made. For CEQA purposes, you're at the point you have to do the analysis. Agencies all over California try and defer the analysis. The point of the analysis being required is to ensure everybody gets the appropriate notice and all of the community input comes in. If you delay this until October or November of this year, you will have HCD you will be on record with HCD saying we will rezone these properties. Your housing element will say we shall be rezoning these properties. And then you're going to hold hearings with environmental document at that point? That's cart way behind the horse or in front of the horse, whatever the saying is. You have to do the analysis before you take the action. That's the whole point of CEQA. I don't think you're doing that. If you were looking for a threat, we don't ever threaten anything. We just come up and say we'd like things to be done properly. Sutter Community Bank invested in the community. What you're doing is not a fair process. It's landing all of the burden on one property owner. It will render this infeasible. You will not achieve your goals, and you'll damage our client's interests in the property. You'll damage the 53-lot subdivision next door, which is in enough trouble as it is trying to develop out, and you'll have folks across the street impacted, if such a thing could ever be built, by 20 units to the acre across 15 acres in one spot in the city. I understand you aren't legal minds. I understand you could think I'm incorrect, that your staff has a different interpretation. One, I would ask them to ask your council to weigh in. But secondly, you are the planning commission. You do have the ability to say, geez, 20 units to the acre on that hillside that we've seen before, 15 acres out off of Mallard, is that the right answer? Is that good planning? That's the pitch I would make to you tonight, because if you forward it, we'll show up to council and we'll make the same arguments, and beyond the council, if it gets adopted, we'll do what we have to do. But that's not the point. The point is to work with one another, and that's what we're requesting. Thanks.
Thank you.
I have a question for staff. Oh, excuse me, sorry.
I'd like to make one more comment as well. And that is, CEQA requires that you disclose all of the environmental impacts, all of the possible environmental impacts. If you rezone a piece of land, you have made a new land allocation. That land allocation says this land will be used for this purpose. When you use it for that purpose, it will have effects. If those effects are on the environment, you must disclose those. So if all of a sudden you are changing the density of housing in an area with significant slopes and with significant soil instability and possible drainage or landslide problems, that needs to be disclosed as part of your programmatic You want to call it a programmatic environmental statement. But what it is if you have changed the zoning such that you have changed the use, then you have changed the impacts that would occur if that use occurs. The same thing happens under NEPA. I have worked with NEPA and CEQA for 35 years. When you do a forest plan under NEPA, you must disclose the environmental effects of the land allocations that you make. I think CEQA requires the same thing since it was based on NEPA in the first place. And if you change the land allocation, when you do a forest plan from what it used to be to something new, you must disclose the effects that that would have. So if you are changing what the land is used for, what its land use is, by changing the zoning, and this would certainly change the use of the land and by changing the zoning, and it would change the environmental impacts that would occur, those need to be disclosed. And that's why a neg deck and calling this just a programmatic, I don't think is adequate. Other people have gone to court on it and lost. The planning regs that the Forest Service tried to put out 4 times went down the tubes for exactly the same thing, because they were trying to get away from actually doing the analysis and disclosing the effects, and they went down. So I pass that experience and on to you for your consideration.
Before we close the public hearing, anybody else wish to speak? If not, we'll close the hearing.
Question for staff. Can we combine the recommendations Roman numeral 2 and Roman numeral 3 into one motion? We don't have to have separate motions on that, do we?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, and then just one other question for staff, if I may, Mr. Chairman, and I think I may be prepared to make a motion unless there's more deliberation. Just, and not suggesting that anyone present here tonight has suggested or would put up a legal challenge to what is happening. But if that were to happen from some party, would that negate, in your view, would that negate our attempt to meet the requirements of HCD and thus put us and force us, we would then forfeit or lose the opportunity for the planning cycle that was one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons for bringing this forward and trying to meet the deadline? Would that forfeit it, do you think?
I don't know of anything in the statute that says should a lawsuit come forth, either challenging the adequacy of the housing element or the environmental document, that then it puts the statutory dates in some other position than they already are. So I don't really have an answer for that.
Okay, fair enough. So, Mr. Chairman, I think I'm going to take a stab at a motion unless there's additional deliberation. So, I would move that this commission recommend to the council that they adopt the negative declaration prepared for the housing element, and further that the city council adopt the amended general plan housing element as shown in the draft update Exhibit B. And in their process of those adoptions, that the council give very careful consideration to, one, the notification that was sent to property owners as required by law. Two, consider the, what do I want to say here? Consider, I'm blanking. Consider the adequacy of the negative declaration specifically to its role in program versus project. I'll leave it at that. And 3, that they give very careful consideration to, God, my brain was so coherent a moment ago. Very careful consideration to, forgive me just one second. Oh, to the staff recommendation of the parcels chosen for meeting the very low housing density. That's my motion.
Will you repeat the third one for me once again?
Yes, so the third item I want the council to pay very close attention to is the staff's recommendation for the parcels that have been chosen, and really this one parcel I think is the only one we've talked about. The parcels that have been chosen as meeting the RNA for the low-income housing. So I really, basically, well, I'll wait for a second for discussion.
Well, to move things along, I'll second that.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, my point here is really just to bring the council's, well, just really to bring to the council's attention that there were a couple of things in this that we think they really should look very hard at in terms of when they go through the process of considering the adoption of the negative declaration and also the housing element. So those 3 items were for emphasis. That's kind of what I was trying to get at. I really just think it's really beyond me. Again, Mr. Cook came up with additional comments, and I think they seem to me to be very well reasoned. And I agree. I think that we just have professional, respectful. The city has a respectful disagreement in terms of interpretation and requirement, and that's all fair, and it's not going to get resolved here. Certainly not by me. And I think in order to get that resolved, it's really got to be moved on. And I also support staff's position that this is a program, that simply doing the rezone doesn't change anything except wording on paper. It's not until you actually want to put a shovel in the ground and you make a proposal in terms of what you're going to do, that's when you really have to have the environmental review. And I support staff's position on that. So that's kind of what I'm trying to accomplish.
No, if staff could just point out, it isn't really the shovel to the ground. The city will actually have to pursue the rezone.
Correct,
Which is in the
there's
future.
environmental review as part of that whole process, and to me, that's really when that happens.
Yeah.
So, and at the same time, it does seem highly unreasonable that the properties would ever be used as is being proposed, and, you know, it's a technical dance that we're doing. And it's unfortunate, because I think it's as I said, it's not an allocation, it's a constraint and a burden that's being placed on us. And this is our response to it. So that's where I'm at, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I was just wondering if somebody could repeat the motion. Just give me the,
Well, I guess I could summarize it. Hopefully, I'm going to be consistent. But basically, yes, I would suggest that we recommend to the council that they adopt both the negative declaration that we have here, and they adopt the housing element as prepared here. And in that process of adoption, I'm asking that they pay very, very close attention to the legal sufficiency. I don't like to use that term, but I would say the wording of the notice that was sent out. I really want them to look at that. Number 3 was the selection of the parcels by staff, and I can't remember what my number 2 was.
The comment regarding program versus project.
Oh, program, so that's the appropriateness of the level of environmental review. We did a negative deck in this case. Just paying very close attention is that if that's sufficient or not.
Yeah, if
So
I may
want-
read my,
yeah,
if
I
I
just-
may read my notes, what you had said is you wanted to give careful consideration to the adequacy of the negative declaration, specifically to project versus, program versus project.
Yeah, correct. So those are the 3 areas I think that have been kind of raised that I think require review and concern.
I just want to say that I don't know whether it has any impact on our deliberations here, but as I see it, we have a cascade of arbitrary burdens at work here. The primary actor in that, I believe, is HCD. It's hard for me to understand how some of these numbers are arrived at in light of the fact that we are here in a 6 square mile landlocked city, and we just, you know, we can't build a 13-story tenement tower in this town. And I think by some, HCD is, well, I'll just close by saying, as a 25-year veteran of California state government, this is hardly my first rodeo with what appears to be a bit of a doctrinaire approach, for what it's worth.
Well, I wouldn't place it all on HCD. I would place it on voters of California, putting the same people in charge that passed things like 375, AB 32. It's on us. So, and now we're having stuff crammed down our throat.
If that's our comments, we had a motion and a second. I guess we should proceed with the roll call vote.
Member Friend.
Aye.
Vice Chair Russell.
Aye.
Member Lowry.
Nay.
Member Grobish.
Aye.
Thank you all for coming. I'm sure that the considerations, qualifications that Mr. Friend wants the council to be aware of, that some of you folks will make sure that they are aware of those. And so that goes without saying. Moving on to matters from commission and staff.
Yeah, once again, I'll reiterate, I have provided for you for the next agenda, similar to the last couple iterations that you had, updates to the development guide. Same thing, cross out, underline, strike out, what have you. That's the procedure we followed. I will give you kind of a heads up that the Historical Advisory Committee hasn't finished their Chapter 4 review in its entirety. They want to look at the materials, finish, and colors a little bit more before they pass on their entire recommendation. But so that's been delayed. That's not before you this time. But other than that, Director Rivas, do you have any updates on what's to come to council next week? That may involve the Planning Commission or?
Yeah, I don't believe there's any planning items on next city council meeting.
I have a question about the replacement of our vacant seat up here. Is there any date that there will be interviews or anything taking place for the?
I did talk with City Clerk Zito this afternoon, and she asked about Historical Advisory Committee members, his resignation, and I got the sense, and here I am kind of talking with the director here, I got the sense that that was going to be on the next council agenda, was to have council decide or give staff direction to start that recruitment process. But once I do, I will certainly let you guys know, because I'm sure you talk to people out in the public who might be interested in the position or positions on the other committees that we have here in the city. So at this point, no, I do not have a firm date as to when that happens, but I believe it's coming soon. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you. If there's nothing else, we'll adjourn to the January 21st. Oh, I'm sorry.
So this item tonight couldn't go to the next city council meeting next week because there's a 10-day limit for public notification, right?
It's targeted for the 28th,
Target, oh, and then that's
Yeah.
the deadline?
the deadline?
The deadline for adopting the
No, it's February 28th.
February, okay. And then I was just wondering if there was any update on the repairs and the work over here on the corner of Clay and Main, next to Lofty Lou's. Staff know what might be going in there. They're putting out a deck and,
Oh, yeah, there's a tenant improvement for that particular location. Be a deli. In the portion of the building that faces Main Street. The back portion of the building, if you've ever been in it, it's been carved up over the years in various tendencies. If we're talking about the same building,
the colorful one.
yeah,
It's next to Lofty.
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very small space. So it'd be a very small deli. In fact, I don't believe there'll be any seats inside the building. It'll be a takeaway, or the deck that they're building would be on a sunny day where people would go outside and enjoy their sandwich. But yeah,
Okay, now we can adjourn to our next meeting, January 21st.